Bonzo Finance. Let's switch topics. By the way, I've been seeing the INO stuff going out. People are posting pictures of their monkeys, all that kind of stuff, and I grabbed mine. Shout out to Headstarter. That minting process was super smooth. But I saw that thread that you guys put out about the importance of borrowing and lending. I think it's like that sector represents like 40 some odd percent of value on other crypto networks and stuff. And you kind of speak to like, I think like a drastic underestimation of the impact that borrowing and lending is going to have on the Hedera ecosystem. And yeah, like how's it going? How's the INO going? And then I'd love to hear kind of like your thoughts on all this kind of stuff, because it does feel like the borrowing and lending wave is coming.
Yeah, no doubt. And thanks for the shout out. Yeah, it's definitely been an exciting week. We've got the INO sale that's running through to the end of the week, and we've sold out so far on the space Bonzo. And
Oh,
yeah, we
wow.
put up that thread yesterday talking about sort of the importance of lending and borrowing. I think foundationally, and we saw this when Saucer Swap Labs launched also, is that when a new category of DeFi comes online, I think it's really important for users in the Hedera ecosystem to sort of understand the functionalities of these new DeFi categories, the types of things that you can anticipate being able to do with them, the impact that they're going to have across the landscape of the DeFi ecosystem, and sort of what we're seeing on other networks and in other ecosystems that maybe have more established functionalities and more established abilities for people to partake in. And so, yeah, that thread was like a really good breakdown of sort of how we're viewing lending and borrowing and the anticipated impacts that it's going to have for DeFi on Hedera. And it really is an outsized impact. So, that chart that you referenced shows TVL across every category of DeFi amongst the entire Web3 space. And, there is an outsized amount of TVL that's allocated to lending and borrowing just because of the nature of these types of protocols. They're single asset pools, which creates a relatively lower sort of risk for people who are supplying liquidity to those pools, in the sense that if you're supplying it to a lending and borrowing protocol versus supplying it to a DEX, there's no impermanent loss with lending
Right.
when you're supplying that asset, and you do experience a little bit of that with decentralized exchanges. And so, what we think this helps unlock is large token holders that are trying to find places to manage those funds, and ideally receive yield and do risk management and other types of activities, while at the same time also sort of unlocking that liquidity for the rest of the ecosystem. And so that may be project treasuries, large token holders of these token-based projects like employees or big investors, and then also institutional capital like market makers. There isn't really discussed a lot openly, but there are a significant number of market makers supporting token-based projects on the Hedera network, and they're supplying liquidity to these protocols. They're helping create market efficiencies for the tokens of these token-based projects. There's a number of different activities that they're participating in, and we've been in discussions with various market makers as well to try to sort of understand types of activities that they're doing and what they can do in terms of contributing to Bonzo Finance's TVL. Ultimately, it just opens up the door to so much more that can be done on the Hedera network than just having the DEX functionality. As important as the DEX functionality is and the foundation that it's laid, we have to break into these new types of DeFi categories in order to really expand further.
Yeah, like we talk about, hey, let's build an economy on Hedera and all these types of things. And I think that there's a lot of really kind of, I think, bright people that still kind of miss it a little bit, and and I think also in the thread you mentioned, I think a reality that also we really also have to accept that I think is kind of cool is the fact that a lot of HBARbarians are kind of fresh to this stuff. They've never really operated in these ways on other networks, and that's tough because you kind of have to start fresh with a lot of these people. And you mentioned too, like Saucer Swap's approach, focusing on education, the stuff that you guys are doing, letting people play around and learn. But also I think that has kind of its own benefits of like, they're not arriving with the dogma from other experiences. They're really kind of there's a freshness to it. Do you kind of see it that way? Like, is it all bad that Hedera ecosystem participants are kind of new to all this? Is it really just a challenge, or is it potentially kind of like an opportunity in a way, do you think?
It's both. The opportunity here is that we're educating the community along the way, and I think that's great. Folks are able to learn more, and with that knowledge, they're also probably or hopefully going to other networks and other ecosystems and applying that knowledge and making connections with other communities and individuals, and in those conversations talking about Hedera. And ultimately, we need that. We need the sort of mind share of Hedera and what's happening here to be spread far and wide across other communities. The downside of it is that the ramp up period for some of these new DeFi protocols and projects can be a bit slower. Without experience, knowledge of how to use this stuff, day one for anything that's new, it's gonna take a bit for traction to take place.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's funny too, because again, some people that maybe are like against some of the stuff or don't get it, it's like, if you zoom out and just think about an economy, like let's say like the American economy, it's like, what happens if you remove borrowing and lending? It's like, that's the whole economy. So there's also another side to it of like, it's just reality. It's like, there's a reason other crypto ecosystems do borrowing and lending, is because it's literally a critical part of any economy. So we're not talking about some kind of like new feature or some kind of toy or thing to play around with. Like, this is actually like a fundamental aspect to a functioning economy. Like, I don't think that Hedera can grow in the way that we want it to grow without borrowing and lending. It's the same way of like, how do you grow a real world economy without borrowing and lending,
Well, right. And I think that's the shift, the mindset shift also that needs to take place at many levels throughout the Hedera network. And, I'd say particularly, at the council level, understanding that the network itself is a economy. We need to be treating the network as an economy, and we need to be supporting businesses that are setting up shop to be able to facilitate that. It's an incredibly important aspect of it. Ultimately, probably one of the most important aspects of the way that we're thinking. Each of these networks is sort of like its own nation state in a sense.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And then, so the other thing is that kind of jumps out to me, and I know that's like, forward-looking statements and stuff, but like the numbers are pretty clear. Like, you lay out that 44% of all TVL in Web3 is borrowing and lending, and it's 1.5x of DEXs. So basically like 1.5 times the amount of impact that DEXs have on these networks. And then when we think about the impact that decentralized exchanges have had in the Hedera ecosystem, that's really felt like a 0 to 60 moment. Like when we had Stater come in, and then we had Saucer Swap come in, and then we had some other DEXs, like it really felt like the ecosystem went from 0 to 60 overnight in some ways, and unlocked so many doors for people. And when you talk about people underestimating the fact of that, what the numbers show is, at the very least, to meet the average, is like, put simply for people in this ecosystem, maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong, but like, it sounds like what we're looking at is the impact of borrowing and lending on the Hedera ecosystem is going to be, 1.5x the impact that the DEXs have been. Like, if the numbers are to translate to this ecosystem, the best way I think I can describe it to people is like, that feeling we got with DEXs in the ecosystem, it's going to be that plus another 50%. It's going to be bigger than that in some ways if the numbers kind of add up. And I guess that's kind of what you're saying is like, you know, you're saying to people like, hey, I think you might be underestimating the impact of borrowing and lending.
Yeah, and I'm glad that that message came through clearly, which is what we're trying to get across is that I think it's being underestimated in terms of the potential impact. You know, based on everything that we're seeing across other networks and then across Web3 as a whole. The thing that I think is critical for the success of the DeFi ecosystem is overall liquidity. And it's hard to tell at what point we are sort of maxing out on that liquidity availability, just based on the total sort of number of users and the capital that those users are using to play in the ecosystem. And ultimately, we need more users and more capital coming into this ecosystem. And my thinking is that the biggest unlock for that is legitimate, robust bridging infrastructure that's ubiquitous across the entire space. And you know, our long-term plan and what we're banking on is that that is coming online. There's the partnership with XLR that was made by HBAR Foundation that looks amazing. And you know, with that eventually coming online soon, that opens up the door to you know, awareness of the Hedera network and people being able to bridge assets over you know, inexpensively and through a bridge that they're already familiar with. You know, Hashport has done a great job so far, you know, with facilitating that, but ultimately you can't have enough bridge integrations, and you need bridges that people are familiar with that are bridging tons of assets, not just between Hedera and X network, Hedera and Y network, Hedera and Z network. You need bridges where people are bridging funds across all of these different networks as well. And there's major adoption for those bridges. And so like I'm most bullish about this bridging infrastructure that's going to come online.
Yeah, I just saw Tom leave a comment. Give me a bridge to Solana. I think that that's something but what you're saying is like, we need more bridges. Like, I think that there's so many other ecosystems that have, I guess it's safe to say like sometimes a dozen or dozens of bridges in all sorts of different ways. Hedera kind of has like the drawbridge, you know? And I mean, I don't know what we would have done without Hashport. So I mean, huge shout out to those guys. But what you're saying is like, we need more bridges and we need those bridges to go more places and we need that stat. And the challenges that I hear in a lot of different ways is the market's too small or the funding isn't there. And it's this, everyone says like, it's the catch-22, it's the chicken and the egg. It's what's your thoughts on that?
Yeah. You have to start with having that bridge infrastructure available. There's upfront costs associated with it, but if it's not there, then we can't do anything. You know, people that are you know, driving interest in utilizing their protocols like Saucer Swap, like Swap, like Bonzo Finance, you know, our mission is to try and attract new users to the ecosystem through various campaigns that we would be running. And if there's no user journey and clear, simple path for people to bridge their assets into Hedera as easy as possible, then we can't grow. And we need that. Like, at least have that sort of path available, and then allow the you know, developers in the network, the people who are behind some of these protocols, to really sort of help drive that liquidity being bridged over. And if you look at, there's a map that's going around that shows the siphoning of liquidity across networks using bridging infrastructure, and I think it was specifically Wormhole. Massive amounts of liquidity being driven from Ethereum to Solana, which is part of the reason why their economy has been thriving so much, is they have those bridges in place to be able to you know, have a foundation for users to be able to come over and capital to be siphoned and brought into their network. And so we need that so bad. And the other thing too is, I think, like, you know, you can run liquidity incentive campaigns all day long, but you currently have a finite set of users who are earning rewards from those liquidity campaigns. And if you're not making those incentives more easily accessible to new users who are coming in, then it just ends up being a Hedera community incentive reward program, which I don't think is um, the goal. It's we're running these campaigns because it's attracting new users and new capital, and that's incredibly important.
Huge. And I think we're touching on something here, which is like, I gave the show the title today, you know, the end of an era for Hedera. And it's like, I put that out and I got some DMs from people like, Jesus, dude, like what the fuck? And so for me, I titled it that because, and I was talking about at the start of the show is like, there's definitely been this pressure building in the ecosystem of, gone are the days of, when's the next governing council member coming? How much more TPS are we going to get? Those are fun days, the early days, simpler times. But now things have moved on. And I think there's this pressure that's been building. And over the last few weeks, I think we've seen things kind of reach a bit of a breaking point from the top to the bottom. And for me, when I say the end of an era, it's like that implies the beginning of something else. And I mean, you have so much experience in this ecosystem. And from your perspective, do you kind of feel that way too? I get that sense in the community and from yourself, like, do you kind of feel that, this summer marks kind of a bit of a transition period for Hedera into potentially something new, something evolved? It does feel like, there's just this huge focus on retail, the lights being shined on all these different areas where there's deficit. There's been many wake up calls. There's people that are like, screw meme coins. And then you've got the president of Hedera saying like, we need meme coins. And there's there's all these different things happening. Do you kind of feel that way too? That, these last few weeks and kind of where we're at right now does feel like we're getting to the end of a bit of an era in Hedera in a way?
Yes. Key individual leadership at some of these organizations, that I've talked with, they understand the shift that needs to take place. They recognize the importance of retail users and meeting the market, the public blockchain market where it exists today, while also recognizing we have to evolve with the market as it matures. But you have to address things as they exist today in order to even make it to tomorrow. And we've learned that. We know that that's the truth. A great example of that is that, USDC liquidity and utilization, that is mostly driven by, retail and institutional users. And if you do not have enough, and Tom is citing here CCTP and Wormhole, if you don't have enough USDC liquidity or utilization, then centralized exchanges, they don't care to list the USDC for that network on there because they're not going to get enough trading fees related to that. They don't prioritize it. Circle CCTP says, well, you guys have barely any liquidity. Why would we spend a ton of resources and time and money on integrating Hedera and CCTP when you're the second to lowest
Yeah, it was funny when I was at ETH Denver, I was at the Circle booth and I was like, oh, tell me more about CCTP. Are you guys working on Hedera? They're like, here's a t-shirt.
Right. Yeah. And so it's retail that's driving that, and ultimately USDC on a long timeline, that is a very much so a banking and an enterprise use case, but Circle's addressing the market as it exists today and providing this service to retail users, and chains and retail users on those chains are taking advantage of it and driving innovation around it. And without that piece, then there's no attention that can be given to the Hedera network and its version of USDC. So yeah, ultimately, again, it's about meeting the market where it exists today. And although I do see a big shift, and it is sort of the dawn of a new era or the end of a previous era. Yeah. As mentioned, individual leadership at certain organizations that have spoken publicly about this and that I've talked to, they get it. The problem that I see is, does council understand the market that they're competing in? And I can't tell today. I'm uncertain. It doesn't feel like there's a stake in the ground with regards to their understanding of the market, their strategy, their positioning. They have an outsized impact on the direction of the network and the success of the network. And if they don't get it, then that absolutely is a problem. And so I would love to better understand that. And maybe behind the scenes there is a lot going on with related to that. But we do have to understand what the strategy is there, I think. And are they on board with what the rest of the ecosystem seemingly appears to be moving in with regards to direction?
Yeah. I think that that's a huge point for people is like
the ticker is hilarious, by the way. The governing council might not be big.
I try to like play them off so smooth and ignore them. It's so hard, but yeah. Okay. Joke's over now. So what I was going to say is there's a part there's something that I as a tangible example for people of the disconnect there is, I think I've told the story on the show before, but it makes a lot of sense. Is like when I was at ETH Denver, politics aside, the presidential candidate RFK did that talk. It was like a big deal. There were thousands of people in the crowd, blah, blah, blah. And like any candidate, he's like, there's these evil companies that are, hurting our health, or the military industrial complex. And he's listing these companies and they're so bad and everyone's cheering and like, yeah. And I'm like, I think about the Hedera booth down the hall with like a number of those companies just on there. Our network's owned by these people. And I'm just kind of like, is there going to be a riot at the Hedera booth later? Like, you know what I mean? Like, I was a little worried, but it's that disconnect. And it's not to say that the governing council is bad. I think that the governing council is a huge reason why we've got the traction and enterprise that we've had. Like, I'm trying to make a point for people to understand, like, the conversation about retail isn't about, don't do enterprise. Like, the reality is that I think that Hedera is doing a really great job at getting the enterprise flywheel going, but like, yeah, it does take forever. What do we do in the meantime? And it's, for me, I'm realizing that it's a little bit less about, do we go the enterprise pathway or do we go the retail pathway? We've learned that, retail gets us to enterprise. It turns out retail is the thing that gets us there. And then we know that because we hear from enterprise and they say, you need retail. And so
exactly.
The wrong response is to be like, no, we want you. It's like enterprise is like, no, we want retail. So it's a huge component of that.
Yeah, no, 1,000%. It's a stepping stone to enterprises. You need retail, and you need, the space is still incredibly early, and technologies are still maturing very much so. And what we see today, ultimately isn't what mainstream adoption and enterprise adoption looks like in the future. We need innovation that's taking place on the network and maturity to organically happen for eventually enterprises to collapse into. And we've seen this time and time again in every emerging technology sector, where it starts out with startups, smaller organizations, innovators, people who are taking high degrees of risk to do what they're doing. And then it evolves over time, and then enterprises collapses into it. And like the public cloud market is a great example of that. If you go look at AWS DEX from when they first launched, for many years at the beginning, it was small organizations that they were catering to, and the product evolved over time with those small organizations and got bigger and bigger. And then eventually enterprises employed their digital transformation strategies, and as part of that, adopted public cloud. And now public cloud is just absolutely ubiquitous. You have to have a public cloud and even like a multi-cloud strategy. If you're a large organization, public cloud is even being used by governments for secure public cloud. And so I have no doubt that because of the transformational impact of this technology, that the sort of disruption that we've seen in past industries is going to be the same for this industry. And ultimately, I think that there's going to be the emergence of new companies that do end up eating the lunch of enterprise. These companies are based on Web3 business models where they can extract the fullest value of the technology and pass that value on to end users. And enterprise will need to adapt to that in some way, shape, or form. That's not to say that there won't be sort of like integrations that take place where maybe it's like BlackRock or another institution sort of has a mix of the two, where it's still a Web2 business model, but maybe they've tokenized assets on blockchain for various efficiencies. But ultimately, it's a disruptive technology, and looking at past disruptive technologies, I think we have to treat it the same.
100%.